Die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Da-die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, 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 die. Yai, die, die, die. Well, hello everybody and Shavua Tov. I'm Rabbi Marcia Tilchin, zooming in from Detroit, where I've been with family for the last few weeks. But the greatest thing is I've still been able to connect to the Jewish Collaborative, my my temple of Zoom, if I can say that, even here. And I just want to say how thrilled we are that you are joining us this evening for our Havdlah Together, which we do weekly. And almost every week features something really special or interesting to lift your spirit or open your mind. And tonight we have an incredibly moving program that I think is going to have a great ripple effect for all of us in the work that we do to combat Holocaust denial and so much more. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to my friend and inspiration, Beth Crom. Just know that at the end of the program, we are going to do Havdlah and recite Mourner's Kaddish. Those of you who are in a period of mourning or observing a yard site will be able to do that. And because we're really talking about a community of people who were, lost en masse, maybe we can all share a Kaddish in their memory. Beth.
Thank you. Well, it's lovely to be with all of you tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm very excited to have our two guests that I'll be in conversation with, Sylvia Foti and Grant Gushin. Sylvia is a journalist, a creative writer, a teacher, and a mother, and she holds a master's degree in journalism, education, and creative nonfiction. She has been a journalist for 20 years and has published 2 mystery novels, and she has also been a high school English teacher since 2007. Her participation this evening is about a deeply personal part of her life and the way in which her journey has intersected with that of our other guest. Sylvia has written a book called The Nazi's Granddaughter, How I Discovered My Grandfather Was a War Criminal, which will be released in hardcover on March 9th. And joining Sylvia in this conversation is Grant Gushin. Grant currently serves as the Honorary Consul General for the Republic of Togo and as the Vice Dean of the Los Angeles Consular Corps, which is the 2nd largest consular corps in the world. In March 2018, he was appointed as the Special Envoy for Diaspora Affairs for the African Union, which represents the 55 African nations. Grant is actively involved in Jewish affairs, focusing on historical justice. He has spent the past 30 years documenting and restoring signs of Jewish life in Lithuania. And he served as chair of the Miseva project in Lithuania, which mapped, inventoried, documented, restored over 50 abandoned and neglected Jewish cemeteries. He is the author of Malice, Murder, and Manipulation, a book that documents his family's history of oppression in Lithuania. So now a little bit of history to set the stage for our conversation. Within 5 months of Nazi Germany's invasion in the summer of Lithuania in the summer of 1941, most of Lithuania's 200,000 to 220,000 Jews were already dead, shot and left in massive sand pits and massive graves, along with thousands of ethnic Poles and the mentally ill and others. By the end of the war, the percentage of Jews killed in Lithuania, 90 to 96%, was higher than anywhere else in Europe. One of the main reasons so many Jews were killed in Lithuania is because of the help of the local population. Grant Gushin, as I mentioned, is a Lithuanian Jew who was raised in South Africa, now lives in Los Angeles, and Grant has initiated multiple lawsuits against the Genocide and Resistance Research Center of Lithuania, requesting that it cease honoring Jonas Noreika, as a World War II hero. More than 100 of Grant's relatives were murdered in the Lithuanian Holocaust, their deaths ordered by Jonas Noreika. Sylvia Foti is the granddaughter of Jonas Noreika. You'll correct me on the pronunciation. Whose nom de guerre was General Storm. Reported to be the highest ranking military Lithuanian official in two counties during the Holocaust, Sylvia's grandfather was chief of the second largest region in the country during the Nazi occupation. Sylvia made a deathbed promise to her mother to complete a book her mother had hoped to write about the hero Sylvia's grandfather had always been portrayed as within their tight-knit Lithuanian community in Chicago. Her research would paint, however, a very different picture and challenge her to chronicle not the hero myth, but the truth about her grandfather. Sylvia has been described as exceptionally courageous for publicly telling the truth about her grandfather, whom far-right elements in the Lithuanian government and its history-fixing agencies continue to revere with street names, plaques, and state-contrived history. Sylvia has circulated a petition which reads in part, quote, "I am Sylvia Foti, granddaughter of Jonas Noreika. The facts about my grandfather have been clearly established. The convoluted gymnastics of the Genocide and Resistance Research Center of Lithuania to deny the culpability is a stain on the nation and an abuse of the memory and dignity of my grandfather's victims. I cannot stand by and watch the deceptive distortions and revisionism by the government of Lithuania in order to validate its conduct in reforming my grandfather into a national hero. He was not. My grandfather was a Holocaust perpetrator, and he was not alone. Lithuania has the freedom and responsibility to look at the actions of Lithuanians during the Holocaust. We must face our grandparents' misdeeds. It is time," end quote. And while both Grant and Sylvia have been recognized for their courage in this fight for truth, Lithuanian nationalism has led extreme conservatives to call for a Holocaust law similar to Poland's, which forbids anyone from accusing the state of Lithuania of having participated in the Holocaust. When Grant and Sylvia decided to join forces, they had no idea how effective their partnership would become. The publicity their literary and legal efforts have generated has caused an international scandal and a manifest public relations disaster for the Lithuanian government. Despite international media attention on Grant's court cases, Jonas Noreika's heroic status thus far has prevailed in the Lithuanian court. This is the first time a government has gone to court to defend their historical revisionism in order to perpetuate the myth that Noreika, a man responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Jews at the hands of their neighbors and countrymen, is a national hero. I just wanted to set the stage so that everybody would be able to understand the conversation from here on out in context. So I'm going to start with you, Grant. Okay. And I'm going to ask you to please briefly share the genesis of this enduring fight for truth. You know, what inspired it, what inspires you to continue despite your setbacks, and what the cost has been to you, both emotionally and financially, to pursue this over the years.
Beth, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And Rabbi, thank you very much for your kind words. Beth, I'll try to make this brief. I grew up in South Africa, and 3 of my grandparents were from the Baltics. and they were damaged. I didn't understand that as a child, but I've come to understand who they were and what made them only during these past 30 years and since they've died. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, had a huge influence on me. He was a rare Jewish grandfather from Europe that actually spoke about his life and his history. Most of our grandparents that came from the old country would never talk about anything and hid it from us, as did my other two grandparents from the Baltics. And my grandfather used to tell me the stories as a child, and I was fascinated. He died, and I will tell you, it's been 35 years, 36 years since he died. And there isn't a day I don't think about him and I don't miss him. And my father was going to throw away his photographs. My father said, what do we need this for? There's nobody to look at this. And I was, no. This is my grandfather. This is my history. And I took them and started studying them. And I wanted to remember my grandfather. I didn't want his stories. I didn't want his life to die. And so I began to research. And when there were signs that Lithuania would become independent, I claimed restoration of citizenship that my grandfather had. Not for any legal reason, but I so much wanted a connection to my grandfather, something that I could pass forward and say, this is from Sam, this is from Sam Gochin, this is just part of the legacy. It was a way to keep him alive. And Beth, I encountered unbelievable anti-Semitism. It was, I knew about it historically, but even in South Africa, in the worst days of apartheid, I never encountered the kind of anti-Semitism, the gut level genetic hate. And it was shocking for me. And I looked at this and I was like, this is what 3 of my grandparents faced. This is what our people faced. But I'm facing this now in the United States when these people have no power and they're not standing over us with clubs and guns and dogs and can exercise their hate. And it just came at me viscerally. And it was a shocking experience for me. And it just brought to life so much more of my grandfather's stories. And I looked at this and I said, I'm not your victim. I will not be your victim. My grandfather couldn't fight against you. He was powerless. And I'm not powerless. And it was their hate that turned me into an activist. And gradually over the years, the more I encountered it, the more I experienced, the more I dug my heels in. So that was the genesis. That was the genesis of this whole process. But let's skip forward to 2010. And by then, I was probably on my 7th or 8th trip to Lithuania. My grandfather had asked me if I was ever able to go, because when he died, Lithuania was still Soviet and South Africans weren't allowed onto any Soviet territory. So as many times as he tried during his lifetime, he was never able to physically return. And the moment Lithuania was freed of Soviet rule, I was one of the very first people to go. And I remember on my first trip, I went into the pine forests, and I took pine cones from the forest, and I took them back to South Africa to put on his grave, to say Kaddish, as we'll say later this evening. And I restored the family cemeteries. And even restoring the family cemeteries, they fought me so hard, because making the cemeteries visible again made people say, well, where are these Jews that were here? These cemeteries, allowing the cemeteries to go back to nature and get hidden is a form of Holocaust denial. So one day I was in my grandfather's shtetl, and there are 3 death pits. There were 3 killing fields in my grandfather's village. And I went from the one to the other, and I was saying Kaddish at each one, as my grandfather had asked me to. And I was with an academic, and I said to the academic, you know, who killed them? Who pulled the trigger? Who took my cousins out of their homes? Who murdered the babies? Who burnt down the shuls? Who killed them? And the academic looks at me and says, it was a man by the name of Jonas Noreka. And it wasn't even, the academic didn't even have to think. It was just an automatic response. And so I wrote the name down, and I came back to the United States, and I started researching Jonas Noreka. And I found out that in 1984, Germany had exposed Jonas Noreka as the murderer. So that was 6 years before Lithuania even regained independence. So there was no question that he was the murderer the whole time during independence. And then I find out that he's considered one of Lithuania's greatest national heroes. Now, this is in 2010. This is 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And I said, you know what? It can't be. You can't have a country that's 50 years. I'm sorry, it was 2010. It was 60, 70 years after the events, and them calling genocidal mass murderers their national heroes.
I want to kind of shift to Sylvia briefly,
okay,
and then come back for more of that, because I think this is a good point to kind of shift to Sylvia. This was your grandfather, Jonas Noreka. Somebody you would learn had published an anti-Semitic booklet called Your Head High, Lithuania in 1933, which some have compared to Mein Kampf, and that he called for a total economic boycott of Lithuanian Jews on nationalistic grounds, ultimately ordering the murder of tens of thousands of Jews. You were raised with a different image of your grandfather. So let's talk about, I think Grant has set the stage very well for what he encountered, but let's understand the man who was the myth you grew up with, and how your journey of discovery was inspired, and how you reconciled what you learned.
I was born in Chicago in a neighborhood of Marquette Park, which is like Little Lithuania, and had the largest number of Lithuanians outside of Lithuania, and grew up speaking Lithuanian, went to kindergarten not speaking English. And this was a thing the Lithuanian community did because they were very proud that their children spoke Lithuanian, and they wanted to make sure that they could do that. So I grew up, you know, spent a lot of time with my mother and her mother, my grandmother, and who was the wife of Jonas Noreka. And my grandmother told me many stories about her husband and what a big hero he was in Lithuania. And so, you know, I grew up hearing how he died in a KGB prison because he was fighting against the communists. And he was only 36 years old, and they tortured him in the KGB prison for trying to lead a rebellion against the communists in 1945-46. And he died a martyr fighting for Lithuania's freedom. I heard how in 1941, he led a rebellion also against the communists after their first invasion of Lithuania in World War II. And it was the northwestern side of the country. And then I heard how he had had a very high political position. He was a lawyer. He was a good writer. He was a creative writer. And he was the head of the Cholet district. And he was fighting against the Nazis at that point, and how he was saving Jews even. And for that, he was sent to a Nazi concentration camp for 2 years. So he was in a Nazi concentration camp. He died in a KGB prison. He fought against the communists. He ostensibly fought against the Nazis, and he ostensibly saved the Jews. So when Lithuania gained its independence, they had resurrected him as a really big hero after the communists, you know, left. And during that time, in 1997, I went on a trip to Lithuania with my mother and my brother. And President Brazauskas gave my mother the highest honor that that somebody could get posthumously. And it's this Cross of the Vytis. So it's a big honor for someone to get, and she got it from President Brazauskas, and I was standing next to her. And it was a very big, important moment. He has a school named after him in northern Lithuania. He's got plaques, a plaque in a big building in Vilnius. He has some streets named after him. So, you know, I grew up with this legend, and I thought, what a wonderful man. I looked up to him. I aspired to be like him. I mean, you know, I invoked him, you know, to sort of look after me and help me. He played a big role. I never met him, but he was brought up spiritually so often between my mother and grandmother that he felt like a living presence in our home. And in the year 2000, my mother was on her deathbed. It was a shock. She was only 60 years old. We didn't expect her to die. But on her deathbed, you know, she calls me over and she says, Sylvia, you have to write the book. And I had a hard time accepting that she was dying, but I said, okay. And then the next day when I came back, she had gone into a coma. And so that was it. I was left with this deathbed promise. And then 5 months later, my grandmother, her mother, is now suffering from a heart attack. It was like her third or fourth one. And now she's on her deathbed. And so I go visit her. And she says, Sylvia, what's going on with the book? And I said, don't worry, which means grandmother. I'm going to work on it. I'm not going to let it go the way Mom did. I'm a journalist. I'm going to do this. And she says, don't write the book. And I'm like, what do you mean don't write the book? I have to write the book. I promised Mom on her deathbed. How could I not write the book? And she says, just let history lie. There's no need to dig around. And I said, I have to. I don't understand what's going on here. And she didn't like my answer, so she turned over and kind of faced the wall. And that was the end of that conversation. And I didn't know what to make of what she meant at that time. And the next time I saw her, she was in a coma and died. And so this was 21 years ago now. They both wanted to be buried in Lithuania. And so they asked to be cremated. So my brother, who's in California, and I brought their cremains to Lithuania. We buried them. And then we were asked to visit the school named after my grandfather. And so I go to the school, and you know, we're greeted by the children who have flowers and they're singing. And the director brings us into his office, and you know, the teachers are all standing around. And it was, you know, a beautiful moment in memory, you know, of my grandfather. And my brother and I felt like honored guests to be there, and it was a very special occasion. And then the director says, so I understand that you're writing this book about your grandfather. That's so nice of you to do that. You know, I'm so glad you took this project over from your mother. You're such a good daughter. And I said, thank you. You know, as long as I'm here, why don't you tell me how you named the school after my grandfather? And he said, well, you know, before it was a terrible Russian name, and we wanted a good Lithuanian name. And after we got our independence, you know, we had to think of a good Lithuanian name to put here, a good patriotic one. And your grandfather was born here. So, and he's such a big hero in the country and such a legend that it was a natural. And I thought that would be the end of the story. And, but then he pulls me to the side and he says, but you know, I got a lot of grief over naming the school after your grandfather. And I said, why, what? And he said, because of the Jews. And I'm like, what could the Jews possibly say about my grandfather? And he looked at me like he couldn't believe I didn't know this. And I couldn't, you know, and the way he said it kind of like casually, like it's just, you know, a common knowledge thing. He said, well, he was accused of killing Jews. And I said, what? I could not believe it. I could not believe it. It was like he punched me in the gut. And, you know, I was feeling dizzy. I had to sit down. I was breathing fast. I was shaking. My heart was, you know, beating fast. And I just, it was a big blow. It was a big blow. I did not expect anything like this. I was not prepared for anything like this. And then the director, you know, he sees I'm upset. And he says, but don't worry, that's all in the past. You know, it's just communist propaganda. It's nothing to worry about anymore. Everything's fine now.
Wow. Let me step in. You know, I don't know why I'm... Okay. Something is interfering with speaking. I don't know why. Hopefully that won't be a problem. So there's Grant's story, Grant's grandfather, your mother and your grandmother. You both have a connection to Lithuania, and you're both on your own journey. But then there's a place where this intersects. So I want to ask about that, how the two of you became aware of what of even the existence of the other, and how you became allies in your work to uncover this this situation. So Grant, you want to pick it up there?
Sure. So when I found out that Noreka was this huge hero, I approached the Lithuanian government and I said, you've made a mistake. There's an error here. And they hadn't made a mistake. They were honoring him because he was a fervent nationalist that believed in ethnic cleansing, and he successfully carried out his program. And Beth, I was outraged, I was disgusted, I was appalled, I was horrified. And I exhausted every path I could to rectify the situation. And eventually there was no path left but to go to court. And so I sued the government of Lithuania. I made all of my research public. You know, at this point in time, I'm a pretty well-known activist on the issue. And I put all the data. I wanted every academic in the world to know what was actually happening and how dishonest the government was conducting itself, how dishonestly. And the courts kept throwing my lawsuits out. They said, you have no material interest in discovering who murdered your family. And I kept saying, I don't want a material interest. I'm here for the truth only. And the truth is clear, and your government is lying. And so I was pretty well known at that time. And the government denied all of the data that I presented. He was only following orders. He didn't know that the Jews were going to be murdered. He was, you know, they came up with every excuse there is. The courts were blocking me. Every government department was blocking me. I went to the criminal authorities and asked for charges against members of the government for Holocaust denial. And then, Sylvia, why don't I hand that to you?
So this is about the year 2018. So 18 years passed from that moment I found out that terrible rumor about my grandfather. And in those 18 years, you know, I had spent a lot of time conducting my research where, you know, I ended up going to Lithuania in 2013, and I spent 7 weeks there, and I talked to a lot of people and a lot of experts and family members, and had learned that in 3 cities of Lithuania, he was in charge. And in those 3 cities, a total of 8,000 Jews were murdered under his watch. And in the city of Šiauliai, there's like documents that he signed. So there's very strong evidence that I had found independently of what Grant, I didn't even know about Grant yet. And then I came back home from 2013 to 2018. I was working on the book and I was writing it. And it took me 5 years, lots of rewrites, and, you know, lots of things happening in my personal life. And, but then I finished, 2018, I finished. And at that point, I had to develop what they call an author platform in order to get a literary agent and then get a publisher. So I had to start building an audience. And I put up a website, and within days, somebody found me through my website and contacted me. And he's introduced himself. He's Andrius Kulikauskas, and he introduced himself as a researcher from Lithuania, working for a man by the name of Grant Gochin, you know, who's a Lithuanian Jew living now in Los Angeles. And he says, well, he's suing the Lithuanian Genocide Research Center for Holocaust fraud, mostly about your grandfather. Did you know this? And I said, no, I had no idea. I mean, I cannot believe that this is happening. And until that moment, I thought, I mean, I knew what I was working in was not a small story, but I thought it was still just a family story and it was just a one-man thing. I only focused on my grandfather. If I came across any other names, I just kind of, it was too much for me. It was very overwhelming as it was. And I knew it was going to upset the Lithuanian community, but I thought, you know, I can focus on my grandfather and nothing else. And that's what I did. So I was very laser focused on that. And to hear that this is now kind of becoming a big national thing and a lawsuit really sort of freaked me out. And but then Andrew says, you should talk to Grant. And I'm like, what? and I said, I don't know. I don't think, you know, I don't think he wants to talk to me. And, you know, I'm like the granddaughter of a perpetrator. I mean, I don't know. This is going to be, I don't know. And I was really scared. I was literally scared of doing this. And it took me 6 weeks of thinking about it and praying. And by the end of it, I finally, you know, talked myself into it by saying, who did I write the book for? If it wasn't for someone like Grant. So I wrote him an email, and it said something like, you know, hello, my name is Sylvia Foti, the granddaughter of Jonas Noreka. I assume you know who I am. And I'd like to speak with you. I heard about your lawsuit. You know, can we talk on the phone at some point?
Okay, so Beth, I'm sitting in my office, and you know that I'm just not that good at technology. So all these things just pop up on my screen, and I wish I knew how to turn them off. So this email pops up on my screen, and so I open it up, and it says, "Hello, Mr. Goshin. My name is Sylvia Foti. I assume you know who I am." And I'm like looking at this, and my hands start going like this, and my skin breaks out into a sweat, and my heart is pounding, and I'm like, yes, I know who this is. I knew who she was. And she says something like, I'd like to establish communication. And I'm sitting like this. I had a visceral physical reaction. Here is the granddaughter of the man that murdered all of my grandfather's family, that he spent his entire life mourning for, and she's emailing me. So I had to catch my breath. I mean, for everybody watching, Beth knows me. I usually know what to do in a situation. I was at an absolute loss. I had no idea how to react, how to respond, how to emote. So I respond to her. I said, yes, Ms. Foti, I know who you are, and I am willing to talk to you, but I need a few days, because I needed a few days just to bring myself to a base where I could talk to her rationally. And so we set up a time. I needed a clear time that nobody was going to interrupt me. I had no idea if she was going to pick up the phone and start swearing at me and saying, you sing about my grandfather. You know, I was so accustomed to raw hate from Lithuanians directed at me that, you know, I'm used to this now. I can deal with anything. And I didn't know what I was going to encounter. So I needed a clear time. So I called Silvia, and I'm like hostile, because I don't know what to expect. I don't know what's going to come back at me when I talk to her. So I said, how can I help you? Whatever words. And I told you I'd made all of my research public. And she says to me, I've read your research. And I'm like, yes, you know, waiting for her to throw it back in my face. She says, it's correct, except for one major thing. So now I'm really suspicious of what she's going to say next. So I said, what? You know, just really adversarially, aggressively. I said, what? She says, you've missed out on about 10,000 of my grandfather's victims. It was the first time somebody had acknowledged the research, that I was getting truth. I tell you what, I don't even know how I finished that conversation with Sylvia. I did finish it. From the work that you do, Beth, I will tell you that there is nothing that can lead to reconciliation and friendship like raw, naked truth. It is the baseline of creating relationships. So that was how long ago, Sylvia? That was 2018?
Almost 3 years ago. The conversation ended where I offered to send you my book, PDF of the book. You know, it wasn't even published yet. I didn't have an agent yet. But you know, we had talked almost an hour on the phone, maybe half hour. I can't remember. We talk 5 times a day now, so I can't remember what it was like then. But
I want to ask Sylvia, because, you know, I mean, in the Jewish community, you know, this is a history we've been raised with, that we understand. Many of us have connections to Lithuania. My relatives are all from Lithuania and Latvia. But what did you have to calculate the price you might pay within your own community? And what price has that been? I know both you and Grant have been subjected to some pretty aggressive responses. Do you mind sharing with us?
Yeah, no, I don't mind. I knew when I started uncovering, like I went through a period of denial for about 10 years, like from up until about 2010. And then I just started finding more and more things, so that finally, when I finally resolved to just finally look into the Nazi occupation and what my grandfather did during that time, that was a big breakthrough for me. It was a psychological breakthrough. And once I decided to look for it, then I started finding it. And then our information started to come to me. I mean, when I started this, I did not even know about the Holocaust in Lithuania, if you can believe it. You grew up with it. I heard nothing about it. And I heard what we Lithuanians always hear about the communists, and about how our relatives were sent to Siberia. That was what I heard all the time growing up. I mean, I would hear, you know, horror stories about relatives who went to Siberia, who died, you know, who came back damaged, and how horrible the communists were who did that. I was literally afraid of the communists, like growing up in Chicago. And so I did not even know about the Holocaust at all. So I think I knew when I started uncovering all this, I understood how Lithuanians are. And I knew that this was going to be a story to unravel their narrative about this. Once I finally had done all the research on the Holocaust and everything, I was shaking in my boots because I was all alone. Until I met Grant, I was literally all alone doing this by myself. I had spent, for me, an enormous amount of money on this. I went into debt. And it was a big emotional cost. And I kept it a secret for those 18 years because I knew that if I talked to Lithuanians about it, it would not be well received. So
there's an understatement.
So So I knew, and I'm also a writer, and I'm kind of like in the field. So being Lithuanian and being a writer, I knew that, Lithuania has like this big protective shell over its reputation. And so I knew that I could not change the story from within. There's no way I could get through the shell from the inside and break it. That much I knew. So I knew that I have to write the best story I could possibly write in order to get a really good publisher, and then this would break the shell from the outside. I knew I could get at them from the outside. It could not be from inside Lithuania. It has to be like a big publisher in the United States. It has to get a lot of attention. And so that was my strategy once I decided to do that. So when I went public in 2018, I had finally finished the book. I met Grant, and then I joined Grant's lawsuit by writing a letter of support. And then that was met with a lot of vilification in Lithuania and in the community here. And I was getting a lot of hate mail. At that point, now that I went public, I was getting a lot of hate mail. Some Lithuanians were trying to come visit me, at my house and like talk me out of it. And I wouldn't let them come. My father was against it. I let him read the story. He understands what happens, but he's very patriotic, and he thinks it would just make Lithuania look bad. So he was against it. I think it's amazing how the two communities lived in the same country, but had such like they're alternate universes. They're parallel universes. They're not together. They were not together. They're like two separate people in two separate, like it was the same country, but it wasn't the same country. And so my book, I think, for the first time, marries these two stories into an integrated narrative and puts these side by side, the communist occupation and the Nazi occupation and the communist occupation and the independence. Like, it's the first time anybody has ever put this whole story together with what, and my grandfather served as a beautiful.
Huh? Let's just
take
the word beautiful back.
I think she means it. She means it in a different way.
I get it.
I would say an extraordinary. That it's extraordinary.
Everybody's an editor.
I would say that it's extraordinary that your grandfather's life did straddle all of these worlds. I think it's extraordinary that in many ways his background as a writer, I mean, he was a writer and a publisher. He, was a lawyer, so he was somebody who would fight in the legal courts. That here you have in your journalism and your literary enterprise and in Grant's legal efforts, that in some ways you've taken what your grandfather sadly used to promote anti-Semitism and to contribute to the deaths of tens of thousands of Jews. And you're using those same weapons, not the violent weapons, but the weapons of words and the weapons of the courts and the weapons of your voice to really take down a huge wall of resistance about the truth in Lithuania. So we've got like maybe, I'd like to, if somebody has a question, put it in the chat. We'll try and get it in here in the next 10 to 15 minutes. But while people are putting questions in the chat, I'd like each of you to share, because there have been many twists and turns in this, not the least of which is that the two of you discovered one another and became this unlikely team of allies.
And such good friends.
I mean, it really is, in the Jews have a term, righteous Gentile, which is used for those who risked their lives in order to save Jews in the Holocaust. And while we're talking about history, I think you very much exemplify that role of a righteous Gentile, because again, it won't surprise you to know, now that you are so much more knowledgeable about the Jews and our history, that
I just had my first babka today.
Well, then you're halfway to being a total Jew right there. but how hard it is for Jews to get people to corroborate our stories, and in the absence of corroborating our stories, how easily our history has been sanitized and whitewashed and dismissed. By the way, Sylvia has been recognized by the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Do you have that beautiful statuette there?
I got it in November 2019. I'm very proud of receiving this in Chicago.
I mean, that really speaks volumes. That is a great honor. And I know you've been recognized by others. But while I'm looking at the questions that people have put here to figure out which ones we can weave together, I'd like first Grant and then Sylvia, just in a minute or two, all these twists and turns, what was the most fascinating, sort of revelation, discovery, minor or major achievement? What's something that has come out of this journey that you would want to make sure you shared with the audience tonight?
I tell you what I consider a major achievement, which nobody else in their right mind would consider an achievement, is the Lithuanian government threatened me with criminal charges. Imagine their fear that they are being so exposed that they have to reach that kind of level of raw Soviet-style intimidation as to threaten an American with criminal charges for submitting a historical study. It means that I've truly disrupted their narrative. Beth, I do believe that the work I've done has exposed a national government for wholesale rewriting of Holocaust history. The world now knows, because of my work, and on March the 9th, when Sylvia's book is released, because of her work, the world will know so much more of the truth of what happened in Lithuania to 220,000 Jews. So I've given my family back an accurate history, and that to me feels good.
Thank you. Thank you. Sylvia?
Well, in my book, The Nazi's Granddaughter, probably the biggest revelation, I mean, there were many, many revelations and surprises along the way, but the biggest one that is kind of like the climax of the story almost is when I was visiting with an aunt who was 10 years old in 1941. And she was telling me how my grandfather and grandmother had moved into a new house in this town where 2,000 Jews had been killed under his orders. And I said, what do you mean they moved in this house? And she said, well, the house had suddenly become free. And I'm like, what do you mean had suddenly become free? And she said, well, there are a lot of empty houses now in Plunge. And I'm like, I think I was eating dessert and I like choked on my crumble cake or something. And I said, are you talking about these houses of the Jews? And she said, yes. And I said, my grandparents moved into a house of the Jews? And she said, yes. And I said, are you sure? And she said, yes. And I'm like, how old were you? She said, I'm 10. And then she had her sister sitting next to her. And the sister says, she has a really good memory though, even for 10. Like you have to believe her. And I'm like, okay. So do you know where this house is? And she says, oh yeah. And I said, can we find it? So this was the little challenge, because she was very sick and she was on this 3rd floor apartment that was not in that town anymore. And so it took some work to figure out which house it was. But that house was right next to the synagogue that served as the ghetto to round up the Jews before they were marched out. And it was across the street from the police station, which served as the Nazi headquarters for that town.
May I interject just for a moment, please?
Yeah, we've got just a couple of minutes left. Go ahead.
Okay. The day that Sylvia and I met, the day that we spoke, and then she sent me her book, I sat in this very room that I'm in right now, and I began to read it. And I'll tell you, I didn't get up until I finished the book. It's one of the most compelling reads that you will ever read. And I think I've read the book 5 or 6 times, and there are parts that I still cry because she describes what happens. There are so many twists and turns in that, and it's so instructive as to how Holocaust revisionism works, how history gets written, how politics is manipulated, just as not as her friend, but just as an individual, a Jew, a descendant. I'm so grateful to this woman right here for giving our families back the truth. And the world needs to understand what happened, how it happened, and that it cannot happen again. Sylvia's book, The Nazi's Granddaughter, is the manual for how this has to be never again.
Thank you. The question, there were some questions. I'm not going to take the questions right now because I know that we do want to do Havdlah and Kaddish. I don't know if either or both of you will be sticking with us. A couple of the questions, Grant, that did come in had to do with, and again, I don't want to answer them now, but maybe you'll stick around for a little post.
Sure, of course.
For a little post Havdlah closing. People were interested in knowing when you launched the suit, what you hope to achieve through the suit, what the history of the South African Jewish community and Lithuania, that I know you'll be
that would be 7 Zooms.
You'll be here till midnight. But anyway, so there were questions about that. I also just want to read something that Martha Gervitz posted here, because I think it really does reflect. And I have to tell you, there were many moments during this conversation when I got goosebumps. I mean, and I've spoken to both of you before. So, I mean, I'm sure if I got them again, people were feeling this very emotionally. But she said, "This brings tears to my eyes, what Sylvia has done here, exposing her grandfather. She's a righteous Gentile and a beautiful human being for doing what she did. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You've brought a kind of peace to those Jews whose families were murdered in Lithuania."
Yes.
And I think she speaks for all of us.
Absolutely.
So I thank you both very, very much. Please do stay if you can. I know it's later in Chicago, so we're not
Saturday night though. It's okay.
All right. Well, we do this every Saturday night. So if you enjoy it,
here I am. Okay.
For the next presentation.
I knew babka.
But I think we'll be bringing Rabbi Tilchin on now to conduct the Havdlah, and then we'll all say Kaddish, both for those who are mourning and for those that we lost in the Holocaust. So
absolutely, it's hard to say that what Beth said. It's hard to call this thrilling, but as Beth said, like the goosebumps, it really. Every moment of your shared presentation was, I became a different person through the process, and I can't wait to read the book, and God willing, meet the two of you in person and have a chance to. I can only imagine that to be able to actually experience a conversation with you in a room would even be doubly as amazing, you know. I mean, and I hope you'll have a chance to educate the entire world together in good health for many, many years. And other doors may open because of it. So I want to welcome everybody who joined us tonight. There are some new faces that we don't necessarily aren't Havdlah together regulars, and we're thrilled that you came. And we have a terrific menu of Saturday night programming coming up in the next few months. So I just want to let you know that if you're not on our mailing list, we'd love to have you get on our mailing list, and you'll get updates on who's coming when. And we're always thrilled to have our friends from Heritage Point with us. We're so happy that you are tuned in. Next week, you know, we've started a series called Let's Get Real, where we are we give you 72 hours to watch a new movie with a Jewish theme, and then on Saturday night we'll talk to the director, writer, or producer, or something like that. Next week, we're actually going to have a presentation by a filmmaker named David Siegel. It's Blossom Siegel's son. And he made a movie during COVID. And so some of you may know that the movie industry basically came to a standstill for the last 11 months. And so I've invited him to talk about what it was like making a movie under these unusual circumstances, and to share a little bit about his process. So I hope you'll join us for that really interesting conversation. And if you don't have plans for Purim, we are, the collaborative is part of a seven either congregations, organizations gathering on February 25th for a very fun Zoom Megillah reading and spiel. So we hope you'll join us. I'm now going to make Havdalah. We'll say Kaddish, and then I hope we can stick around for some more questions. Hinei Yeshuati Heftach v'lo efchad Ki oziv zimrat Adonai Vayhi li lishua Ushavtem mayim bisason Mimanei ha-Yeshua L'Adonai ha-Yeshua Alamcha v'irchatecha selah Adonai tzvaot imanu miskav lanu, Elohei Yaakov Selah. Adonai tzvaot ashrei adam boteach bach, Adonai Hoshia, HaMelech Yaneinu v'yom koreinu.
ליהודים הייתה אורה, בשמחה וששון ויקר כן תהיה לנו.
כן תהיה לנו.
ליהודים הייתה אורה, בשמחה וששון ויקר כן תהיה לנו. כוס ישועות אשא, ובשם אדוני אקרא, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מיני ושמים.
אמן.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei me'orei ha'esh.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael amim ben yom hashvi l'sheshet yemei ha'maseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol.
Amen.
Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, Atoteinu yimchol, Zarenu v'chaspenu yarbe kachol, v'kachol chavim b'layla. Zarenu v'chaspenu yarbe kachol, v'kachol chavim b'layla. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hakimadi. I think it's so beautiful that, you know, Eliyahu is going to herald the coming of the Messiah. And that ultimate redemption is going to happen when, as Grant said, when people can reveal the ultimate truths. And so as we rise to remember our loved ones and to remember all those who perished at the hands of, you know, the Lithuanian forces that took these lives, we really appreciate the gift of our lives and the opportunity to remember them in solidarity. Please rise if you are able. Yitgadal, v'yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Yalma divrach ute, yamlich malchute, v'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala uv'zman kariv, v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, la'alam ula'amen amaya. Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar, v'yitaleh, v'yithalal, Shemei Dekudesha, Barichu,
Barichu.
Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma, v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shlama Rabba min Shemaya, v'chaim aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen.
Amen.
May their memories endure for all of us, and particularly grant for families like yours as an incredible blessing. And thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So Beth, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Okay. So now we're going to return to some questions. And so, Grant, before we get to the South African connection, yeah. and you've now become an expert on everything, but there was a question for Sylvia about what your relationship is right now with the Chicago Lithuanian community. Are you, Sylvia, did you hear me?
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, there was a question about what I see you were getting comfortable assuming that only Grant was going to get.
Yeah, because you said Grant. I thought, okay, I'm just going to watch.
Well, there was a question about what your current relationship is with the Lithuanian community in Chicago, with your home community in Chicago.
I have some friends who are Lithuanian. I'm kind of more distant than I have been, you know, before I was super immersed. And now I'm not as involved as I used to be. So I'm rather distant from the community. I have some loose connections, but I don't go to the events anymore. So it's rather loose.
Would you say you feel like a pariah in your community, or you simply choose to be less directly engaged?
Yeah, I've chosen to be less directly engaged even before all this, okay. 20 years ago.
Okay.
I think I might feel uncomfortable though if I like walked into an event. But I'm not going to try it for a while.
Sylvia, we'll take you as one of ours.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome here anytime. So Grant, I'm going to just let you talk for a bit, but the questions were both about what you're trying to achieve through the lawsuit, what you hope to, you know, what would a win look like? And if you are successful, like is there something beyond your immediate efforts that you would hope to achieve? And is there some, because of course my husband Sally is also from South Africa and his family was from Lithuania and Latvia. And so, but have you got any insight about, because the person who asked that question said that their understanding was that most of the Jews that came from Lithuania to South Africa came from primarily 3 cities in Lithuania. So what's your insight on that?
So the South African Jewish community is 90% South African. It's an intact It's an intact,
90% Lithuanian, you mean?
correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's an intact community that just got transplanted from Eastern Europe into the tip of Africa. You know, the Lithuanian government knows that they have a saleable commodity in Jewish tourism. They, you know, small countries like Lithuania, their primary value is their vote at the UN. So, and it happens with a lot of these small countries. So Israel wants Lithuania's vote at the UN, and Lithuania absolutely doesn't want to tell the truth. They know the truth, but they don't want to tell it. So there's almost like a settlement between Israel and the Lithuanians: vote for us at the UN and we won't hold your feet to the fire. Well, I think that any kind of communication between Lithuanians and Jews has to be based on truth. Our family spent 700 years in Lithuania. There has to be a reconciliation. There has to be a communication. And it has to be on truth, because otherwise, when truth does out, those relationships will just shatter because they've been built on fraud. So ultimately, I want to see reconciliation between people. I mean, look at the relationship that I have with Sylvia. Now, I actually have so many Lithuanian friends, good, decent, honest, wonderful people. And this can be expanded. I mean, Jews lived in Lithuania for 700 years, and then they were slaughtered. But not all of us were slaughtered. You here, Solly's here, I'm here. You know, there are relationships to be built. And I think the end product of all of this is ultimately true reconciliation, friendship, and recovery. I mean, don't you agree, Sylvia?
Yes, most definitely. I think for Lithuanians, it will be difficult because it's a trauma for them to realize this. They've been kept in the dark for so long, most of them. You know, I'm not talking about just the few people who know this, like in the government, whatever. Like for me, it was traumatic to find out that my grandfather was a Holocaust perpetrator. And I think it will be the same for many Lithuanians too, in Lithuania and outside of Lithuania, the diaspora. So to come to terms with this, to truly come to terms with this will not be easy for them. But once they get to the other side, yes, reconciliation is so necessary.
Beth, I mean, you are so aware and knowledgeable about South Africa. So make a comparison between Lithuania and South Africa. Blacks and whites in South Africa were completely separate, lived entirely different lives. Whites were perpetrators, blacks were victims. And you know, but it wasn't a genocidal annihilationist victimhood. Now, South Africa was liberated in 1994, and truth was told. I mean, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the perpetrators in South Africa told the truth. And there is so much reconciliation in South Africa, true friendships, true cooperation, true, I mean, for all the problems, because there'll always be problems, but there are true relationships that can be created and a new generation can be moved forward. And that's ultimately my hope, is bringing the South African model to Lithuania and finding a new footing for Lithuanians and Jews together.
what standing will a court case have in the World Court?
Okay, so what date is today? Today's the 20th. 12 days ago, my lawsuit was served in the European Court of Human Rights. So I have sued the government of Lithuania in every single court there is inside Lithuania. They have rejected. There is no path to truth inside of Lithuania. Having exhausted every possible legal remedy inside Lithuania, I'm now eligible to sue Lithuania in the European Court. And so I have. I had 6 months from the last date that the Lithuanian Supreme Court threw my case out. That was August the 18th. So my lawsuit had to be in by February 18th, and we got it in on February the 8th. So the European courts will take at least a year to answer if they will hear the case. But in the meantime, Sylvia's book comes out in about 2 weeks' time. And that is what will change hearts and minds. You know, a lawsuit is going to make Lithuania conduct itself according to the law. But that isn't going to change. It's going to legally expose Lithuania. But it's Sylvia's book that is going to open eyes, change hearts and minds. And that's why it's so important.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay. All right. The questions keep on coming. How are you funding these suits, Grant?
There goes my retirement account, Beth. You know, no NGO has stepped forward to help me. I've had to self-fund this completely on my own from the very beginning. There is an organization called the American Israeli Civic Action Network who stepped in, how long ago, Sylvia? A year and a half ago?
I can?
Yeah.
Yeah, about a year ago.
And they are taking a political track on this. You know, one of the most interesting things that happened is Sylvia's grandfather is only one of many perpetrators. The Lithuanian government is converted. I mean, this is, you know, it's quite incredible. When people use the word conspiracy, I usually look away and laugh because most conspiracy theories are crackpot stuff. But this is a conspiracy, and we've exposed it. And there's a conspiracy within the Lithuanian government to convert Holocaust perpetrators into their national heroes. And one that we did, one that I exposed was their prime minister, who they considered a national hero. He came to America after the war, and Congress started investigating him, as they did many Nazis that came to America, and he died. And the hearings were in front of the Immigration Naturalization Service. So because he was now dead and there was no live body to deport, they had to close the case. So the Lithuanian government, who have the documents with his signatures on them to build the first concentration camp in Lithuania, makes a claim that US Congress has completely exonerated and rehabilitated him. Well, first of all, Congress doesn't have the power to exonerate, and Congress doesn't rehabilitate. So on the face of it, the statement is dishonest. So I produced the documents for the Lithuanian government saying, you are misstating facts. You have the documents that he was a Holocaust perpetrator. why are you saying this? Unfortunately, the people in Lithuania that control the national narrative are not that much different from, it's a different time and a different place. They can't do what their grandparents did, but ideologically, they're not much different. And they have doubled down on their lies. I know this is meandering, but I actually went to Congress, the US Congress, and the US Congress wrote to the Lithuanian Prime Minister saying, you are misusing US congressional documents for purposes of Holocaust revisionism. And do you know what the Lithuanian government response has been? They told members of US Congress they know more about the operations of US Congress than members of Congress do. I had 4 lawyers, very high profile American lawyers, write to the Lithuanian government saying, this is not what the documents from Congress say. They claim they know more about US law than US lawyers. They've written letters insulting members of Congress as just politicians for the sole purpose of Holocaust revisionism. So getting back to ICAN, Israeli American Civic Action Network, they are taking this to Congress because Sylvia's grandfather is only one of many. And you can't have a national government engaged in official Holocaust revisionism, threatening me with criminal charges for exposing some of it, insulting and demeaning Sylvia in court, and dismissing her 20 years of research. This is not what a US ally does. And it's time that our Congress actually understood what's going on in Lithuania. So ICAN is the only NGO that's stepped forward to help. So the long answer to your question is I'm funding it myself, doing it myself, and eventually the world will follow.
Well, I want to, because we're nearing 8 o'clock and that means it's nearly 10 in Chicago. Some of us operate on Chicago time all the time. So our days are coming to an end. Are there other, just to get it, one more question. In addition to Lithuania and Poland, who are engaged in active revisionism, and I was thinking about a time when I was in Spain and was at a Jewish museum that had been a synagogue that had then been turned into several other things and was restored. And they had the sort of cards that in different languages so that people who are visiting, would learn about the Jewish history. And it said, the Jews fled, they weren't expelled from Spain. The Jews fled Spain in 1492 after an unsuccessful uprising. So, it's like these moments that you have where you're like, how does this stand? Like, there must be somebody else who can read these and sees that this is clearly, so revisionism, historical revisionism, protectionism of historical myth, look, we're confronting that in America in a lot of ways, and we're not going to go down that road tonight. But but are there other, as you've been fighting this battle for truth, are there allies with Lithuania in the battle to preserve a false history? And is any of the resistance on the part of Lithuania because there's sort of an unholy alliance between various nations that prefer to rewrite history rather than to own it?
Beth, it's really unpleasant and inconvenient for a country to stand up and say, we weren't just victims, we were also perpetrators. And, you know, nobody wants to air their dirty laundry in public. The fact that Lithuania has been independent for 30 odd years and has actually had a government enforced program to rewrite their history, can you imagine how embarrassing it's going to be for them to go to their own population and say, we have taught you fraud. We've told the public fraud. I mean, you know, they're in a really bad situation, which they've put themselves into.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, as traumatic as it was for me to find out what my grandfather did, it was like the trauma was doubled and tripled by finding out what the government is doing.
Right, right.
You know,
By the way, Grant,
yeah.
We're not going to turn this into a telethon. However, somebody wants to know how they can donate to support your work. Is there a?
You know what? If they went on to, hold on. What we are doing is a program. ICANN is doing a program to send Sylvia's book to every member of Congress. So I don't want any donors for me. Okay. But I tell you what I do ask for. If you would donate to ICANN to help us send copies of Sylvia's book to every member of Congress.
Is that ICAN? ICAN?
Yeah, I've just put the message. Oh, it says me to, oh, hold on, me to, how do I send to everyone? Okay, here's the link.
Okay.
If, you know what?
Grant, we will send it out to everybody who attended tonight.
Please.
Okay, and also the collaborative will make a donation.
Thank you.
As you know, our incredible gratitude for sharing your time with us.
It's all of our families, Rabbi. It's, you know, you told me that 3 of your relatives came from Belarus. There is a case where a Lithuanian was the leader of the murder squad in Belarus. And he was so cruel that Jews actually went to the Nazis to ask the Nazis just to kill them without torturing them first. And Lithuania has monuments up for him. Oh the man that murdered Shimon Peres's family in Lithuania is a national hero. I mean, in Belarus, is a national hero of Lithuania. So we have to educate Congress, and truly Sylvia's book is the best way to do it.
You know, first of all, there's just this, you know, it feels like, you know, you peel one layer of the onion and you just never, it's the never ending, it sounds to me. Sylvia, I'm wondering if there are other descendants of rewritten heroes that have been inspired by your work, you know, grandchildren of other lauded Lithuanians who really could be understood differently. Has that happened at all? On the heels of
there are a couple other books that came out. One is by Rita Gabus. She's half Jewish, half Lithuanian, and strange, you know. But she had a perpetrator in her family, and so her book had come out maybe 5 years ago, something like that. It didn't really get a good traction though, because the thing about my book is it's just about one man. And I think that's a lot easier for people to follow and get involved in than kind of like a lot of different scenarios. Like in her book, she did the whole Jewish thing, then she did the whole her relative thing, and then lots of things in between. It's beautifully written, but it didn't have like, and then there's 1 or 2 other books too, but they kind of had the same issue to me. Like it was not this, that's why I think, you know, and I studied them too. And I wanted to make mine different from that because I wanted to make a difference in this issue. And so You know, I think it ended up being strategically really good that I focused just on my grandfather. I did it because I couldn't deal with talking about anybody else. Like I was just already fed up. So, but in the end, I think it serves the cause better to have it so focused on just the one man.
Yeah, I'm sure it's true.
Just out of curiosity, are those donations to ICANN tax deductible?
Yes.
An even better reason. A good reason anyway. We are right at the 8 o'clock mark. So I want to thank, I have the good fortune of knowing Grant and Sylvia as personal friends. And I met Sylvia through Grant, so I'm grateful for that connection.
Same.
And I certainly appreciate the time that you were willing to give. I've heard this story, but tonight I think this story came together in a much more complete way. And we had we had over 50 people on Zoom. I know we had a lot more on Facebook Live, and this will remain housed on the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County Facebook page. So people who didn't get a chance to see it, if you want to share it with your friends, you can share it from the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County Facebook page. So people are just expressing their thanks. Clearly, you had made a strong impression on the people that were with us tonight. And we hope that you will consider yourselves part of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County family.
Beth, nobody's given a better example of citizen activism than you.
Yes.
I have learned more from you since we've been friends than I think virtually anybody. And I have to tell you, Beth Crom, I think you are fabulous.
Well,
and I'm saying that in front of everybody.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, this was great. And I look forward to more of these conversations, these Havdlah, pre-Havdlah chats in the future. So we'll keep you posted on those programs as well. And do stay in touch with us, Grant and Sylvia, as the book is launched. If there's anything we can do to help spread the word and to support the work that both of you are doing, we're just very proud to know you. So thank you.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank
and
you,
you know, Grant, you'll probably think about the fact that we had this talk right before Purim. Talk about, you know, the baseless hatred, and that for no reason the king said, okay, you can slaughter all the Jews in 127 provinces. Go ahead, I don't care, as long as you like my clothes. I mean, really, it was so, you know, almost such a fitting way to think about the week of we're in Shabbat Zachor and Purim. That's, you know, right now. And so this was, I didn't really put the two of those together, but Beth, this was an incredibly fitting conversation as we enter the week of that holiday. So I will say, in that vein, Purim Sameach, everybody, and Shavua Tov. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Jackie and Beth, for doing this.
And Grant, just before we leave, Yael Weinberger Butler just wanted to remind you that she met you at your cousin's birthday party. So I'm going to leave you to work that one out.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.